Alex Murdaugh will spend the rest of his life behind bars.
That's right. The judge handed down the former lawyer's sentence earlier today, ruling that he also would not be given any chance of parole. The jury in the case convicted him yesterday of murdering his wife and 22-year-old son. Murdaugh spoke in court during the sentencing, saying he would never hurt them. CBS News' Michael George has more on this.
Alex Murdaugh addressed the court before his sentencing Friday.
I'm innocent. I would never hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never hurt my son, Pawpaw.
But the judge said the disgraced lawyer, who's admitted to stealing millions from his clients and firm, lacked credibility.
You can convince yourself about it, but obviously you have the inability to convince anyone else about that.
Moments later, Judge Clifton Newman sentenced Murdaugh to life in prison without parole for the murders of his wife Maggie and 22-year-old son Paul in June of 2021.
For the murder of Paul Murdaugh, whom you probably loved so much, I sentence you to prison for murdering him for the rest of your natural life. Those sentences will run consecutive.
It took jurors less than 3 hours Thursday to convict him on all counts.
Guilty, verdict, verdict, guilty, verdict, guilty.
The swift verdict came after a 6-week trial where Murdaugh took the stand in his own defense and admitted to being at the crime scene minutes before the murders took place. Prosecutors say that decision to testify ultimately hurt him.
He's been manipulating people for decades, lying and manipulating to get his way, and I feel like he could do this to the jury. That's probably what he was thinking, but it blew up in his face.
Murdaugh also faces multiple charges for alleged financial crimes, some of which he admitted to during the trial. Michael George, CBS News.
Joining us now for more on this is Arthur Aidala. He is a trial attorney based in New York City. Arthur, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. So what is your reaction to Alex Murdaugh being sentenced to life?
Well, the life sentence didn't surprise me as much as, I've obviously done this many, many times. I was more than surprised that his lawyers didn't say a word. Normally on behalf of your client as a defense attorney, you're making some sort of a plea, even if it's a Hail Mary, even if you know it's not going to be successful, you still make the effort. They made no effort. In other words, the judge said, "Is there anything you want to say?" And both lawyers said, "No, Your Honor." I've never seen that, ever seen that. And then they asked him what he wanted to say, and he just said, "I'm innocent. I would never kill my wife and child." And then when the judge, who I thought was fantastic, that was right out of Central Casting. That could be in any movie. He was riveting. I watched the whole thing. When you guys just played, he's like, I'm sure you loved your son, and you killed him. And right before that, he said, "And you have nothing else to say to me. You've appeared in this court before me. You and I are friends socially." And he didn't say friends, but we've interacted socially. And you have nothing to say. And he was really pushing for him to say something more than just maintaining his innocence.
Let's play that clip, Arthur, that moment when Alex Murdaugh addressed the court and had his opportunity to say something, because you're right, the judge's response almost seemed to suggest he wanted to hear more. Let's just show that for our viewers.
It's really surprising that you're waiving this right at this time. And if you opt to do so, it's on you. You're not compelled to say anything. But you have the opportunity to do so.
And I tell you again, I respect this court, but I'm innocent. I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son, Pawpaw.
It's such a dramatic clip, and Elaine was just noting how Buster, his son, you can see behind him watching all of that. So what did that sound like to you?
Sounds like a lawyer who knows he's going to appeal, and he doesn't want to. And obviously, his own lawyers, must be thinking the same thing. I don't know what they're thinking, because it doesn't make sense to me that they wouldn't say anything on his behalf. As much as he spoke about, ripping people off, he does have a storied history of doing the right thing by a lot of other people. They didn't bring anything like that up. In fact, the judge said something really riveting, that this was a death penalty eligible case. And he does not disagree with the Attorney General's position not to seek the death penalty. But he said, the judge said to him, you and your family, meaning his father and grandfather, have sought the death penalty and has had it instituted for lesser crimes. Wow. Basically saying you as a prosecutor sentence people to death for less than this, but they chose not to sentence you to death. And I also want to say, though, his attorney's not speaking and him not speaking, I don't think that was going to move the needle. I don't think the judge was going to change his decision. He clearly had his mind made up.
So you mentioned the possibility of an appeal here. Well, some jurors say that they reached a decision in 45 minutes. Arthur, do you think this speed in which they reached that decision could potentially be grounds for an appeal?
I don't, not in and of itself. That would not be a grounds for an appeal. I've had very fast verdicts. They go both ways. Sometimes it's a full acquittal. But apparently in the closing arguments, the prosecutor made some statements that could be deemed prosecutorial misconduct. And that could be grounds for appeal. What people have to understand is an appeal is not whether a person is innocent or guilty or not guilty, or whether the facts have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. It's whether the judge made any mistakes and the prosecutor made any mistakes. And even if someone is 100% factually guilty, but they did not get a fair trial, that's the role of the Court of Appeals, is to uphold our American values and our American laws to make sure whoever gets found guilty is found guilty under the law the right way and that justice is served appropriately.
And so just quickly in our last few seconds, Arthur, what was the comment that you think would suggest grounds for an appeal, according to what the prosecutors said?
I believe the prosecutor brought in other bad acts that never were introduced into evidence.
Oh, I see.
Other bad things that he had done that were never on the record, that were never brought in. You cannot do that as a prosecutor in your closing argument.
Well, we'll see.
Verboten.
Well, we'll see. You know, the Murdaugh team would know where to poke holes based on his experience. All right, Arthur Aidala, thank you.
Thank you both. Have a great afternoon.